Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Today is April the 7th, Wednesday, April the 7th. The time is now 2:03 p.m., and I'm calling this special meeting of the North Carolina Public Librarian Certification Commission to order. And at the start of each of our meetings, we read the ethics statement, which I will now do. In accordance with the State Ethics Act, Chapter 138A of the North Carolina General Statutes, it is the duty of every board member to avoid both conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to any matters before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict or appearance of conflict and refrain from any undue participation in the particular matter involved. As a matter of old business on the agenda, we have called this special meeting of the commission to discuss next steps for statute language changes as it relates to our credentialing processes and criteria we use. So that said, I will kind of turn it over to Lauren to kind of facilitate this discussion.
Okay. I was looking back over my notes, and from our last meeting, Dr. Gant had mentioned that we should have this meeting to sort of talk about our process going forward, what the scope of the changes we'd like to make to the language might be, just sort of get us thinking about and start kind of moving along with this process of changing the language. So if we could, I guess, let's start thinking about and discussing the scope of the changes that you would like to make as a group to this language. I'll put in the chat for you the language directly from the notebook so that you can see that. Give me 1 second. But if anyone wants to go ahead and talk about what you'd like to see or what you don't like about the current ones or anything like that, feel free to go ahead and share.
I'm trying to think if I remember.
Well, so I'll kind of start us off a bit just to provide some context, maybe, or to any viewer, then maybe to as reminders to any of the committee members. I think part of why this is even on the table to discuss is because this current iteration of the commission acknowledges that it has been quite some time since the language that we are using was reviewed or instituted. I don't have specific dates or times in mind for when this became the criteria of the language that we use to kind of certify these public librarians. But I know that it's been some time. I don't think it would be an understatement or an overstatement to say that it's been decades. And so as a result of that, it just felt appropriate with all of the changes in society and within the library profession specifically that we kind of update the language and the criteria to some extent, or at least review it to see whether or not updates were required. So that's kind of some context for why we're gathered here. And I see Lauren has now added the administrative code to our chat. And so if members want to pull that up and kind of take a look at it before we move forward any further discussion, that would be good. And considering that this is a fairly lengthy document, one of the things I would also say is that another reason for why we've called this meeting is to kind of discuss a course of action. You know, this alone isn't the action. This meeting alone isn't the action, but the commission as a whole thought that this, you know, the process of potentially changing any other language would be worth, you know, putting together a course of action that included consulting, you know, other experts within the field, be it other public library directors, you know, or other bodies, administrators or professors of library science at the various library schools or programs within the state, to kind of get some of their input about any changes we ultimately propose. So.
So it's what is in the chat where we're focusing our efforts right now on that A, B.
So that is, in itself is the statutory language for the courses.
Mhm.
So we can figure out today, like, do we want to change those words? You know, are they out of date? Are they relevant? You know, we can decide today, like, if we want to make that change, because that would be you know, we'd have to go through the process that we talked with the attorney about to make changes to that.
Well, and not so much changing the words for me, or as much as adding language. So cataloging is a traditional word, right? Could we say cataloging, this includes, and give some example, like metadata, this includes digital descriptions for archival, just to guide people to know more current language that might reflect some of the, a survey of library schools to get an idea of what they're calling those classes now, because I don't think they're necessarily calling them straight out cataloging like they once were.
Right.
And I did see that when you go to the website, there's some language that talks about metadata management, introduction to bibliographic metadata. And so some of that is in there, just in the description. Yeah, um, it does give some of that. And then courses associated with that, but it doesn't mention the metadata in the courses, but it does include like catalog and classification, organization of information knowledge, creating information infrastructures, information organization and access, cataloging again, information representation and access, information structures, information to knowledge organization, and bibliographic organization and resource development. But again, there's nothing that specifically targets what Wanda's talking about. So I don't know if that's something that we want to add in courses associated with that, or where it has a description of what cataloging covers. Will that cover it?
I agree with what Wanda and Sandra are saying. That was the gist of our conversations. And as Brian said, it's just been a while since this has been reviewed, and things change in any field of study. And so that we don't have to hunt and look for things, maybe, you know, just bringing the language up to date so that it's more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we could ask ourselves, do you want to change the statute itself, or would we like to just take that document that Sandra was just reading from and maybe add to that or revise that document, which is not a statutory, we're not bound by a statute there, except to make sure that the courses that are described for each of, you know, for reference cataloging, collection development, to make sure that relevant courses that are, happening right now in library schools, that we're incorporating that into our review process. So is that, and Timothy, stop me if I say this incorrectly, like technically that document is not part of the statute, but we use that as a guide when we are doing our review to look at what courses in the past have previously been used for those subject areas and that type of thing. So I don't know how that document came to be. So that,
I don't know either. Timothy
yeah,
here.
Yeah, it's like when I went to the website and then when I was going to print it out, it printed out all of that information. So I can try to go back and find the link, and then it gives you the information about
I think I have it actually right
okay.
here. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then when you go to print it out, it gives you all of that additional information.
So I have another kind of question, not related to necessarily the definitions of those 4 kind of core criteria, but also I know this commission has discussed previously the need or the possibility of including, resumes, a person's work experience, documented, verifiable work experience, as something that we would consider when, extending or issuing a North Carolina Public Librarian certificate. And so my question now for really everybody, not just the commission, but certainly Lauren and Timothy as well, would be, to what extent is that governed by the statute? And if so, does language that would suggest that we, if, again, after consultation with, other public library directors and with, other administrators at, of these library programs and other bodies that we might want to consult on that matter, if there was a consensus that yes, we would want to consider one's verifiable work experience, would that language need to go in here? And if so, would that be a part of this process? Does that make sense?
I'll jump in on that.
Okay.
And just step back and clarify. So we are talking about the code here and not the administrative code, and not separate from the statutes, but the implementation. So the commission is able to establish the criteria for public librarian certification.
Okay.
That's it. The statute does set that up, and the code is the implementation of that. And so what you designate as required for public librarian certification, and here it's the degree and the coursework that has to include these pieces. I would say, based on what Jonathan Avery shared and what the administrative office that would review any rule changes, that if you start down a path of asking for resumes, then you need to be clear on how that's would be evaluated, what you would be expecting, and so that it's not, as he said, not at the discretion of people to evaluate that, but that you have some standard criteria that you would be looking for in a resume, for example. And the other pieces, so that they look for clarity, necessity, lack of ambiguity. I'm trying to remember from that, from their standards for reviewing any rule changes. So I guess I would, if you wanted to consider that, it certainly is up to the commission, but think about the necessity of it, what you would use that, how that would be used in these cases, and how it would be fairly applied. And it also may be something that for the commission's reviews, that they would want clarification exactly how that fits into the application. I mean, they may want more information. And this is not to discourage or encourage either one. This is just laying out that clarity and necessity are important. We'd also would have to look at the if there's additional workload on those reviews, how that might impact. But those would all be considerations, I think, if you wanted to consider, if the commission wanted to consider that. So I'm not sure how that would be worded into the code here as a requirement. So if you all want to talk about it and gather information on that, possibly. But considering how you fairly apply some standard for the review, which is where the courses currently laid out, basically give you that rubric for considering applications.
And
So that
similar-
document, the document that Sandra was talking about, for some reason I'm getting an error message when I try to access it, but it's a 2-page document that was in our notebooks, and it was just to give you some background on that. So in the spring of 2013, Clara Chu, who worked at UNC, who was working at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, put together a core coursework guide to the dynamic library and information profession. And so in that, she sort of went through and did like an environmental scan of what the library schools were offering at that time in 2013. And so that has been the document that, I don't know if you remember, but it was, well, you can't see because of my screen, but like that was the document that we would often refer to when we were kind of stuck on things, or if it, if we weren't sure if it really fit or not, we would kind of turn to that to look for terminology that she had included in that coursework guide. And so I don't know if we want to change that, or if we'd like to make other changes to the actual language for the coursework in our, like, the statutory changes. So I was able to find the paper copy of that. So I just wanted to let you know that was from 2013. And I don't know if that person, if they just did that or the state library reached out to them to do that. I'm not sure how that got started, but.
Okay, I can try to add the link. It's fairly long, but let's see if it'll let you click on it just to see. You muted, Lauren.
It's sending you back to the website where I'm getting the error message. So
Oh, is it?
Sure,
Okay.
yeah, I'm not sure why. I'll have to check what's going on with that link. But
Yeah.
Could
All
we
right, let me try
potentially
something.
just reach out to the library schools and update the coursework guide? Is that an option? Would that meet what we're trying to accomplish?
Well, I think so.
that would be the path of least resistance, I think. But if you feel like the actual words aren't representative of, the profession today in public libraries, that's an altogether other problem.
Right.
But if you don't feel like that, then maybe we can just make a change to that coursework guide.
Well, I'm going through the application process. So I just said apply for a certification. So it just says in that little paragraph there, competencies checklist. It just has cataloging, reference collection, development, and library management.
Um, I,
right? And then a place where you could put additional courses if you had it,
Mhm.
official transcripts, etc. So I was trying to act like a person who knew, who somehow or another knew that this is what the state of North Carolina required, and going through that process.
I think if the coursework guide being updated would meet what we're trying to accomplish, that might be the most expedient thing to do. And, providing that it did meet what the commission is trying to accomplish here, just to give us clarity on what all are we looking for when we say collection development or management. Management is the one that often gives us a little, we have to look a little deeper for management sometimes.
Yeah, and I agree, Donna, that would be a good course of action. Just since we are gathered to have this conversation, and I would like to add or ask this question of the group too. When I think about, like the state library reports and things of that nature, that, public libraries end up submitting, one of the, other things that's certainly accounted for and certainly a large, I think, drives a great deal of what, I and Donna and Sandra in public libraries probably do or pay attention to is programming. And so I also wonder, would adding programming as a coursework kind of a requirement or as an addendum, like would that be something that would also reflect the, kind of the growth and the evolution of the field? Because maybe when these 4 core courses, were decided upon, I don't know, maybe programming in libraries wasn't as big of a thing. But certainly now programming is something that I think is a big part of what we do too.
One of
Say
the things,
programming, am I hearing you correctly, Brian? Are you saying programming as in technology programming?
No, not like programming computers or coding, but like programming just in terms of, like we'll see, when we're reviewing these transcripts, one of the things that we always see, I won't say always, but very often we see, even when library management is absent, or even when we struggle to find the collection, the cataloging course, or we're deciding if somebody, put a cataloging course in collection development when they should have put it in cataloging. What we always see when we're reviewing these transcripts, and again, I shouldn't use always, but what we often see when we're reviewing these transcripts are classes about programming for, developing library programs for youth, or outreach program development, or serving diverse audiences. Their courses, these library schools and programs have courses that speak to that because that's become a significant part of what public libraries offer to their communities. But it's not reflected in the public library certification application. And so if we're going to consult with schools about, them updating, the description of their courses to, better convey what a cataloging class means or whatever, then I almost wonder too, because they're putting a lot of money and resources and time into offering classes on that subject, and certainly in the public library space, be it virtually or in person, there's programs happening all the time, but none of that's reflected in this certification process. Does that make sense?
Well, but I don't know that everybody who ends up in a public library took a programming course in library school.
And I guess what I would say, I agree. I don't know that everybody who ends up in a public library took a cataloging course either.
Well, but everybody right now, under the current practice, most library schools require some form of organization, some form of management, some form of working with the public, reference research. They require that, but I don't think they require a programming course to be a librarian.
Right. No, I agree with that.
So that would be like a plus or something extra. And I didn't realize, I probably slept through that month where we had put that they could upload a resume if they wanted to. So it's already there that they can upload a resume if they wanted to. And the resume would be used if we were at a point, kind of a questioning point around whether a class they took 15 years ago would meet a management something or something like that. Then we have the resume to fall back on. Is that right? Isn't that right, y'all?
Well, we added that to the application because it's a requirement if you're a military, part of military personnel or a military spouse. So we had to put a place on there for them to put that because that is a requirement for them, but we're not using that for just regular applicants. It's only military.
Brian, speaking about programming, I think I remember you discussing when we were talking about programming, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that you were saying, that a really valuable skill for public library directors to have is the ability to make strong community connections, because our work is outside the doors of the library now. We're still serving people in the library, certainly, but we have a heavy community presence. And so I don't know if we could somehow, if we update the course guide and then maybe align the courses with those core courses, that might make it easier for this commission to kind of say, okay, well, this is part of the work you do, management work you do as a director. Does that ring a bell to you?
Yeah, and I think, and not to take the conversation like totally off the rails, but I will say this too, like, yes, absolutely. Everything you said, yes, I agree to, and I recall that conversation. The other piece to that though is we have to, I signed 50 some certification or certificates recently. So they're on their way, Lauren. But maybe two of those people will actually venture into becoming library directors. Like the majority of the people who are applying for, these public librarian certificates aren't necessary. And I know that the implication is a funding implication as well. And so, that's one of the core reasons for why the certificate is even extended or needed. But so many of these, so apologies to the group for that. But so many of the people who are applying for them, they have no aspirations for that. And so for being a director. And so sometimes we're denying these applications when, these people have significant public library experience and they just want the certification because maybe an employer who also has maybe slightly limited understanding of why the certification is even required puts on an application or puts on a job advertisement must be eligible for public library certification. Not to be a youth services librarian, you don't really have to be eligible for that. But some of the smaller systems, because they also look to maybe promote from within at some point down the line, they're putting that as a requirement, but you really don't have to have that requirement. And so anyway, it's, to me, that it sometimes kind of opens up that other conversation of, do we need to have public librarian certification and then a separate public library director certification, because they're really two separate things. Because I could be a public library director and never served as a catalog. And so for that, to that extent, why is cataloging on there if this is for public library directors? Because most of those public library directors are not our own catalogers. Mic drop. I'm just kidding. That was not a mic drop moment at all. And I do see the, oh, so is that the document, Lauren, that Sandra was looking at?
Yes, Sandra was able to make that available.
Just the coursework guy.
Yeah, the course competency requirements, kind of a description of what catalog and reference, collection development, and library management actually mean, or the definition that we're actually.
Yeah, I agree. We could probably just look at these courses and put some other course titles to reflect a more current practice. Would probably be helpful, but also maybe a note here where on that first page where you go, where you land, and it says, oh, somewhere it said apply. I don't even see it now. It's now, let's see, course center. I was somewhere else where it said apply.
You want the application? I can put that in the.
No, I was just looking for some place where it gave me the option to apply.
And to circle back to what you were saying, Donna, for like library management as an example, just to kind of see if I understand exactly what you're proposing from a perspective of touching base with the schools. When you say like library management, would it be maybe appropriate under that definition to say something about the community connections there and us verifying with the library programs that are part of the courses that are associated with that competency reflect that? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand exactly, Brian, but I think what I was getting at is if we could just ask the library schools to give us guidance on updating that course guide, and perhaps there could be in a course guide, there could be, you mentioned programming, so programming, community programming, networking in the community. I'm making it simplified, but it takes work. You have to build those networks over time. And I can see that in some way, partially at least meeting a management, it's an aspect of management, is being able to build community connections.
Gotcha. Okay.
But I just think the course guide may be, I don't know. I mean, it's not in its entirety, Wanda, I wouldn't think, but it is an element of what you do in management.
Okay. I was wondering, so on when you go where it says apply, and so you click on apply, it has this section called competencies checklist. Is it possible that there could be a link there that takes you to this where we talk about acceptable courses and similar courses? So you make it easy. I was just trying to figure out, it just depends how deep a person digs. If I came and I saw, it's looking for cataloging, reference, collection, development, library management.
Yes.
Maybe, if I was just thinking about, maybe I want to be certified. There are a lot of academic librarians who just get certification in public libraries for the what if one day some position opens up. so that they would know that they could click here, go to a link and see these other courses. So then it might encourage people to apply who are kind of on the fence and not realizing. But back to Donna's point, and then if we have these other courses in there and they're listed, it will make people be more consistent, because what we've been is kind of not so consistent. Sometimes we give a person the benefit. If they are a school media person, they say, okay, and that person really didn't have a true management course, but they took an intro to school media libraries. I'm not sure that's always been consistent down through the years, I suppose, for other people take it. So if we can create a path that promotes consistency, that would be my thumbs up.
I agree.
Yes, Wanda, that is not a problem at all, putting that in there.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Agree with that too.
And I think that, if I can jump in, it makes me think of a couple of things here, and thank you for that, Wanda. One is just looking at, as you look at the rule there, are these 4 courses that are outlined, are they the right general areas of librarianship? That's one piece of it. Then just to clarify, is that a solid basis for public librarianship? And maybe those are, but this group would be the ones potentially to advise.
And that's
The other is, I'm sorry, I was gonna say, the other piece is then in this subsequent clarification of what those courses cover, does it provide enough detail to be able to consistently apply those rules? And is there additional language needed there? I mean, I also think that the other piece that you're talking about is, what is the problem here that needs to be addressed, and then how do we address it? And sorry, Brian.
No, you're fine. And that's actually kind of what you said with that first point is kind of what I was talking about with the programming, or to Donna's point about the community connections. Like, if those things are fundamental, or even intergovernmental relationships, right? Like, I was talking to the public health director or county management or parks and recreation director. So like forging these relationships and connections, like where is that that's a really essential piece, as Donna was saying, to our work, but that's not really reflected in either of those 4. I'm almost curious, have we looked to see what other states are requiring? Are they continuing to lean on these same 4?
Maybe that's where we could start. We could start by doing a survey of other states that also certify their public librarians. What are their required courses? And let's just look at them and see, is it pretty much consistent across from state to state, region to region, or whatever? So is that something your team could do, Lauren?
Yes.
Well, and I can reach out to the other state librarians.
Oh yeah, Tim, that would be good too. Mm-hmm. At least if you reach out to the other librarians to find out which states have a certification, and then Lauren could take it from there to follow up with her counterparts.
I think that's a very good starting point.
Yeah.
And I know Dr. Gant had mentioned at one of our meetings, he wanted to make sure that his university, when they're doing their course descriptions, that it's abundantly clear. This is a course that's going to meet this core area that's a requirement for certification.
And that's probably, I think, an important piece for the schools here in North Carolina. I'm pretty sure I don't know if there's any data, Tim might have any data about the percentage of librarians who serve in this state who were educated in this state, certified and educated in this state. Interesting.
Yeah, I don't have that data. We don't collect at that level.
Yeah, but I wondered, that might be an interesting side, just an interesting fact,
Yeah.
because then you would know. Well, the flip side of that too, though, is what are the core required courses at the 5 library schools in North Carolina? What are the core, the required? I know management is one. Reference used to be one, and cataloging used to be one. So maybe that's something we could start also. Is just identifying across the 4 or 5 schools here in North Carolina, what are the required courses, and then Lauren, you might find that information valuable for other programs as well. It might be housed someplace. I could see a paper coming out of this, a presentation in the right term at your library, state librarians conference. You're not biting it, huh?
I can definitely look at the, I can gather the required courses from the library schools.
Perfect. So we could, yes, sir.
I want to say, like, circling back to the review of other states, I've just been clicking around, and a lot of states have, like, we offer in North Carolina public librarian certification. A lot of states have tiered certifications. Maryland has a very distinct, like, public librarian versus public library directors. And the public library directors one in Maryland has to be renewed every so often through the completion of, continuing education courses and credits. Georgia, as another example, has a paraprofessional certificate, a librarian's professional graduate certificate, a librarian's advanced professional graduate certificate, and a librarian's doctoral certificate. So, like, it's not far reached, it's not, and I know I said this earlier, but if we were to go down that path of maybe distinguishing between public librarian versus public library director, like, we would not be alone in having had, done that or explored that. And I don't want, and I know this isn't necessarily, this conversation doesn't have to just be restricted to now. And I know we would have to, discuss this with other groups and bodies as well, but I just think I don't want us to be like discouraged or intimidated by that process, because as we talk about, as I said at the start of this call, updating the criteria to reflect, kind of the evolution of the profession and just the, just the advancement of society, we would need to really kind of bring it up to modern kind of standards, and a lot of these other, commissions or certificate granting bodies in other states, they already have delineated between, again, Georgia went so far as to have a paraprofessional certificate.
Yeah, I was just looking at Pennsylvania, and they have a certification level library assistant, provisional librarian, and professional librarian.
Right.
So I see what you're saying with the tiered levels. And then they have separate school libraries.
Right. Especially because, if it's about funding, again, I just think a very small percentage of the people who actually apply for this are really even thinking about becoming a director. They're doing it a lot of times because they see this statement at the bottom of the job advertisement that says must be eligible for. But for that particular position that they're applying for, it's really not that essential a lot of the times.
Brian, when you were talking about Maryland and Georgia, are there tiered systems? Do you have to renew those certifications, or are they a lifetime certification like ours is?
Yeah, so with Maryland, as I mentioned, I think, with the public library director one, it does have to be renewed. I'm not real sure about, I know I cited Georgia, but I'm not real sure. I hadn't dug real deep.
Okay.
Just since we've been in the last 10, 15 minutes, I just started kind of Googling, and going to these
Mhm.
state library or government sites to kind of see. So I don't really know. But having lived and worked as a librarian in Maryland, I know that theirs is you have to renew it. I don't think you have to renew it in Georgia. I've lived there too, and I think mine would still be good if I ever wanted to relocate.
So I know, Wanda, you have to step off here in a little bit. So I
Yes.
just make sure we touch on everything while you're here with us. And so I guess the action items that I have written down are that I will add that coursework guide to the website and then start kind of gathering information from the library schools about their required core courses for our next meeting. Is that, is there any other type of action item you'd like for me to prepare for the next regular meeting to further the discussion?
Don't we?
Go ahead.
I'm asking the rest of Brian.
I hate to ask you to do this, Laura. Could you say what the action item was again? I kind of.
Yeah, that I would start looking at the library schools, their curriculum, and then their core required courses, and get that stuff kind of gathered for you so that you have that to look at our next meeting and kind of get an idea of the language that just our North Carolina schools are using and the courses that they're requiring. And then we did talk about Timothy and I would kind of reach out to our contacts in other states to get an idea of what they are doing. So those were the two things that I kind of had written down to prepare for our next meeting.
And I guess I would add to that for the commission members specifically, I would add, can we really spend some time like really thinking and maybe even asking our colleagues in our respective organizations and then throughout the profession, like, are these really the four? Is it really cataloging and reference and collection development and library management at this time? Because again, specifically when I started, the top of the meeting by saying, this hadn't been reviewed in decades. I mean, we know the definitions that was done in, I guess, 2013, if I remember you saying that, Lauren. But these four, do you know when these were established? I know that I've seen that somewhere before.
I want to say in like the early part of the 1900s, like when the commission was founded. Let me check that.
But I mean, it's been decades, right? And I mean, we know even if it wasn't a whole century, we know it's been decades.
Right.
And I mean, public libraries in particular, we're always talking about how much more we do in the community now and how much more the profession has evolved. And so it just feels ironic to me that these are still the four because that we were choosing 4 or 5 or more decades ago, because the evolution of the field and the way in which we interact with and improve the quality of life in our respective communities now, it doesn't catalog and reference collection development and library management. Cataloging specifically is the one that I personally would kind of struggle with. But that's just because I've never, been charged with that set of responsibilities necessarily. But and oftentimes, I'll say this too, oftentimes I know that cataloging also ends up being most of the catalogers I have on staff here at what I would consider kind of a quasi-urban library setting, they're paraprofessionals. The majority of them don't have a library degree, but I mean, they're very skilled catalogers. And I think that's consistent in a lot of locations, even some of the more particularly maybe even so in some of the rural libraries where they don't necessarily have, you know, a whole vast pool of professional librarians to bring on board to do the catalog. And yet we're using that as criteria to certify. And that just feels dated. So those are good action items. Thank you, Lauren. And the next meeting is scheduled to take place on June 11th, 2021, which I believe will be a Friday, second Friday of the month. And is there any more conversation that we want to have about criteria or course of action moving forward, or are we good with the action items that Lauren presented? Okay. So if there are no other questions or topics for discussion, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
I second. And Lauren, I just sent you a link for regional certifications by state from ALA. But I
Perfect.
second adjournment too.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you
All
all.
right.
so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Nice to see you all.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Have a
you
good
all.
one. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.